Coming up, introducing Miteh Atoske, a life skills program putting healing first. And what does the future hold for Indigenous people? Illuminative updates its Native Truth Survey for some answers. Plus, Anton Treuer is out with a new book, his first in fiction. Next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Leah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amida Wahopa. Thank you for joining us. I'm Aaliyah Chavez. We start today in Arizona, where we're learning new developments in a fatal shooting on the Gila River Indian community. On Saturday, officers from Gila River PD responded to a 911 call at around 2 a.m. at a home south of Phoenix. They reportedly found a large crowd where multiple gunshots were fired. 2 officers as well as 4 others were struck. All 6 wounded people were taken to local hospitals, where Gila River PD officer Josh Brees was pronounced dead as well as a bystander. The 4 others wounded are being treated, including a second officer who is in serious but stable condition following surgery. Gila River officials say they are conducting a joint investigation on the incident with the FBI. In Nebraska, the number of missing and murdered Indigenous persons has nearly doubled after lack of action from the government. In 2019, Nebraska's legislature sought to better understand the reason behind the disproportionate number of MMIP individuals in the state. Lawmakers urged the Nebraska State Patrol to investigate and produce recommendations to address the issue. However, 5 years later, only a handful of those recommendations have been implemented. Since then, the number of reported cases of missing Indigenous people in Nebraska has jumped from 23 in 2020 to 43 in 2024. Well, June is Pride Month, and the occasion is already being celebrated around the world through various parades and festivals. That was the case in Florida, where the Miccosukee tribe of Indians hosted its Miccosukee Pride Fest on the first day of Pride Month. The event brought the Two-Spirit community together, including lots of dancing. Chief Francisco Marin reflected on the event.
For us, existing and preserving these ways is a way of resisting, so we can continue our traditional ways and learning from each other, and sharing wherever we go.
ICT has reported before on how the repatriation of cultural items can be expensive. Now there's help. Indigenous communities worldwide can seek assistance from the Going Home Fund. The Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums has launched the fund with support from the Andrew Mellon Foundation and others. More information on how to apply is available at atalm.org. That's atalm.org. A life skills program is visiting different tribes, teaching women personal development, family parenting, mindfulness, healing, and more. Cree citizen Ivana Yellowback is the co-founder of this program. ICT's Paris Wise has more on how Yellowback hopes to grow this work.
Right now, we do trainings and workshops with staff members, crisis workers, all Indigenous. So we go to Indigenous communities. We also do a lot of work with families. And a lot of the young people we work with are children and youth who are currently in child welfare or have involvement or in prevention of child welfare. So that's where the Mikiwap program would come in. That's one program that we developed.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about the different programs and teachings that you guys offer.
So Miteh Atoske was created by my cousin Raven Hart and I, and Mikiwap is one of the programs that we do. My cousin and I were sitting, and we were actually in the vehicle one time, and we were talking about it. We're like, hey, like, what is a good tool that we have within our systems of building a healthy home? for the women. And then we set the MICU up. Like it's all there. Our ancestors have all the answers already. So we pulled up the MICU up and we developed a 15-week program. And in those 15 weeks, the ladies go through various life skills training. They go through decolonizing family parenting training. It's about a 2 full day training, but we break it down to different program days. And it talks about, again, history of colonization on our families and Indigenous parenting and how colonization has impacted our parenting systems.
What has some of the feedback or result been from this?
So we've been doing that program, I want to say, for about 3 years. And throughout those 3 years, we've seen families reunify. So mothers who had their children in care, we've witnessed them get their babies back. We've had mothers who struggled severely with meth addiction or fentanyl addiction come out of it and are now sober. We've had babies, various babies birthed in this ceremony, and some of them are 2 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old now. That, you know, when they were smaller in this, in part of the Mikiwat program and birthed throughout the program, and now they're growing up in the program with each other. And we have an open door policy where even if you finish the program once, it doesn't mean that you're one and done. Like if you need to come back, if you need the supports, feel free to come back. So we've had moms come back for different cohorts. And yeah, we've seen moms get sober. We've seen moms get their babies back. We've seen moms go on to college and university, go on into graduating college a couple years after, you know, going into work, staying sober, totally getting sober throughout the program and maintaining it.
You mentioned family parenting, and I'm wondering if there are any lessons that you can share with our viewers, on that.
In the training today, we were just talking about ACEs and how adverse childhood experiences can really affect someone's life as they get older in regards to trauma responses, even stuff like substance abuse and whatnot. So when we talk about, family parenting and the child in decolonizing family parenting, baby is the center. Baby is always the center. And in our way of life, baby was always in the center of the family, of the home, of the community. Like our children are the center. And, so with that parenting, it's also not just up to mom and dad. Like it's not all mom and dad's responsibility for parenting. There's also aunties and uncles, there's also granny and grandpa, and how that parenting was communal, and that's something that through colonization, we have the nuclear family parenting style that was implemented through industrialization and through society, that it's just mom and dad and children. And that's so isolating, in our Indigenous communities, there's a whole circle of care that's around baby. And just kind of also talking about that, but also saying to our families and even ourselves too, that, even though we struggle with some of our families and our families struggle with trauma, that we also have chosen families, right? Because I know for some of our relatives, we don't talk to some family members because they struggle with addictions or things like that. But it's also like when you're in your healing journey, you also can adopt people as a part of your family members to help you with your babies. So then we adopt sisters and brothers and cousins and things like that, nieces, nephews. And, our people have always adopted each other. We've always had kinship all over. And, that's one of the ways that we decolonize that kind of mindset of the nuclear home. Mm-hmm.
Would you say, you've mentioned it a couple of times, would you say colonization has been the through line throughout communities you visited that are causing these similar?
Oh, yes. Yeah, because it's affected every aspect of our nation's lives and just even our communities. So even the reserve systems, how the reserve systems were created here in Canada was through the Indian Act, and even Chief and Council was created through the Indian Act. So everything from our governing systems to our land bases to even our education, when the residential schools came in and took our children, everything was impacted from the Indian Act. and which was a huge motor of colonialism. And so just kind of what are some ways we can do without it of the Indian Act and get rid of it? And what does that look like for our communities and ourselves? Because everything is based off of the Indian Act, like even our status cards. You know, like we in Canada, we have status cards. We're the only people in this country that has a card that says what race we are. And that card determines if we're a registered band member to our reserve. And if we aren't, even though we've grown up in our communities and grown up being Indigenous, we're not considered a real Indian if we don't have a status card. And that was a result of the Indian status as a part of the Indian Act. So it's just been such a huge, huge disruptor, and not only of our families, but even our identities.
Ivana Yellowback, thank you so much for joining us.
For sure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so grateful to be here.
We are all children born of water. It is where all life begins. Water embraces and protects us. We revere it in our homes. We need to live close to water. It nourishes and cleanses us. All living things know this. Sometimes water is gentle and floats in the air. Sometimes water is harsh and powerful. Sometimes it catches the sun's rays. Water changes with the seasons, alive and always moving, even when no one is looking. Water is patient. Water endures. Water brings clarity. Water purifies our thoughts. Water brings us together. Water is holy. Water helps us heal. Water is medicine.
We turn now to the world of books, where nonfiction author Anton Treuer has published his first work of fiction. Stuart Huntington caught up with the Bemidji State Indigenous Studies professor and former Guggenheim Fellow.
Sir, welcome to our show.
It's great to be on.
Dr. Treuer, you've made a career writing nonfiction. Now you're poised to release your first fiction book. What prompted you to change tacks?
Oh, I am so thrilled for the forthcoming release of Where Wolves Don't Die, my first work of fiction. You know, it is true that my professional work has been in nonfiction, but I've been telling stories my whole life. I've been doing that in ceremonies. I've been doing that with our traditional winter storytelling culture. I've been doing that in my nonfiction work, but I really understand that human beings relate to the world through story, narrative, and I wanted to try my hand at fiction. I really think that what we have done in the fiction universe with Native people leaves plenty of room for growth. Most of the stories most humans get about Native people are stories of trauma and tragedy and characters who lament the culture they never got to live. And I wanted to share a story where the Native characters were not drug addicts or sexual abuse victims, who were living the culture that we all love so much. one more like the Native culture and life that I know. It's the story of a 15-year-old Native kid who's kind of looking for clues to a murder and finds himself in the process. So the story is a thriller, but it's also a very tender coming-of-age story. The kid gets sent to the family's equivalent of juvie to go run a trap line with his grandfather in the Canadian wilderness and just embarks on a journey of self-discovery. There's lots of drama. There's a love interest. It formally releases on June 18th to stores everywhere. You know, there are multiple layers to what I'm trying to do with the work, and something that really hasn't been done enough are works that explore a healthy masculinity and coming of age and things like that. And so Ezra, in his relationship with his father and his grandfather, is wrestling with these things. You know, who am I as a human being? Who am I as a man? And so when he, you know, has his first successful moose harvest, there's this big feast and the community's coming, and they go through this custom where they, you know, there's a prayer and they're offering the food to him, and he has to refuse the first bite and say, no, I'm thinking of my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves. Okay. They offer again and he refuses again. No, I'm thinking of children who don't have enough to eat. And they offer again and he refuses and says, no, I'm thinking of my family and community and people who came here to support me. And, you know, and then finally he can eat. And there's much more to, you know, what happens there, but it gives you a window into what that can look like in a healthy but very Indigenous context. One of the things that this book does do that is, you know, certainly been underdone is that I'm able to give people a window in to the Native life that a lot of us are living. You know, I go hunting every single year with my children. They've all had their first kill feasts. I'm not imagining that. I'm describing something we actually do.
And Dr. Treuer, this isn't the only big publishing event in your spring. Your book, Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask, is poised to be distributed to schools all across the state of Minnesota.
Yes. You know, I initially wrote Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask back in 2012. And the book really took off. I was initially thinking about how can I help non-Native people understand Natives better? But I was so heartened by the response that Native people gave to the book because we all get bombarded by the same questions too. And I don't know what it was like for you, but when I went to school, I got a sugar-coated version of Christopher Columbus in the first Thanksgiving going to school. Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux community in Minnesota purchased 10,000 copies of Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask and gave them away for free to educators. And even Shakopee was just blown away by the response. They limited, you know, up to 3 classroom sets per school. And within 30 minutes, all 10,000 copies were claimed. And so that was a very heartening response.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
When I think about the reservation and my life there as a kid, it's a time and a place that I really yearn for because I spent that time with really formative people in my life teaching me what it meant to be Navajo.
As Native Americans, substantial rights under the Constitution and laws of this country were going unenforced.
Those traumas show up in our elders throughout our lives, throughout our parents' lives.
A lot of the history is still impacting us to this day.
There's something really powerful that happens when you articulate an injustice. And at NARF, we do that on all fronts.
The Native American Rights Fund is the oldest and largest nonprofit law firm.
Fighting alongside our tribal communities to defend Native American rights.
I see the difference that it makes with our Indian people.
We are facing really challenging times. The right to vote has been under siege.
Without voting, every other right in Indian country that matters falls.
So it's really important to have NARF standing with our tribal people to define voting as part of the fight for tribal sovereignty.
Anytime Native American voters are in a position to swing elections, that's when you see the most egregious violations of their voting rights.
And so we responded to that moment. The Native American Voting Rights Practice Group arose with this rising anti-democratic movement that has been happening across America.
The voting rights litigation that we do is tough. The facts are tough. They're very personal to our voting team, but our wins are big. And we win all the time.
We have to be vigilant in terms of protecting our rights, just like we have these last 53 years.
In order to make good on the promise of America, we have to make sure that every Native American can vote and have the ability to effectuate change in their communities. I think that's the way that we collectively move forward.
The Native vote matters because it's important, because it makes change in all of the states we work in.
When our ballot box achieves justice for Native people, that's when we as a country can really feel faith in our institutions.
This election year, NARF will be leading the fight to protect Native American voting rights in states across the country. Follow along as we tell our stories from reservations, communities, and on the front lines of democracy. Now is the moment. Join us.
Mai maka'u I kahana, maka'u I kamoloa. Mai maka'u I kahana, maka'u I kamoloa. Don't be lazy. Mai maka'u I kahana, maka'u I kamoloa. Don't fear work, fear laziness.
What does the future hold for Indigenous people? That was the question front and center for social justice organization Illuminative. ICT's Shirley Snavy has more on the Native Future Survey.
Next week, the Native Visibility and Power convening will share groundbreaking research. Native leaders and allies will look back at the Reclaiming Native Truth Project. It defined Illuminative's work since 2018. CEO Crystal Echohawk is ready to share the new survey results.
It's ready to make it out into the world. And so we are convening the Native Power and Visibility convening at Muckleshoot, June 10th through the 13th. And all of our researchers will be there to share the top level, most impactful findings from each of their different research. And we did focus groups all across the United States. We did a huge national poll of more than 2,500 non-Native people, right? We have other presentations that are going to interviews with members of Congress and folks in the Biden administration and other agencies to really ask about their perceptions about Native peoples and Native issues. Incredible work that that Holly Cook McCarroll, who's a political contributor to ICT, led the political research, and then Mary Catherine Nagel did a whole study of the federal courts, judges and law clerks to really look at how do the perceptions of Native peoples impact the decisions that are being made that affect, tribal nations and tribal sovereignty. So this is not a research conference, though, and I think we really want to make that, the biggest thing we want people to take away with is this research is not academic, right? This is about research design for tribal leaders, for Native organizers and activists and educators, and all of us that are looking to make a difference in our communities, in the different fields and sectors that we're working in for our people. But one of the things that we constantly underestimate, right, as we are trying to make positive change for our community is sometimes the unseen barriers to that, which we really learned from our foundational research back in 2018, that our invisibility is such a huge component that really plays into bias and even racism, right, against Native peoples, or us being left out of major things. And also toxic stereotypes and people, following these crazy myths like we don't pay taxes and we don't pay for college. And those actually really do impact the way people think about us, or that we all must be alcoholics or addicted to drugs. And that oftentimes is when we go for access to healthcare that impacts the way that our access to healthcare, the way that healthcare providers treat us. And so we've updated the research to see what has changed in 6 years, how are non-natives and key institutions thinking about us, and where have we made a lot of progress, where are there maybe some things that have backslid, right? And where are the real opportunities for us to organize to make a difference in key sectors like politics and education and healthcare and media and entertainment. So this is very much about practitioners, like real people. This is not academics.
Information on the live stream is at illuminative.org. The organization has also announced the creation of Illuminative Media, an LLC owned by the nonprofit. It will be dedicated to increased representation and authentic storytelling in front of and behind the camera. Shirley Snavy, ICT News.
That is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit us at ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.